We had an amazing night, Monday night, in the Big Ten, and talked a lot about it yesterday with Keegan Murray and Johnny Davis and those incredible individual performances. Not every night is going to duplicate that, live up to the hype. There were some interesting developments last night for sure, but it wasn't quite at the same level of the night before.
No, and actually a surprising result in one. Certainly the margins in both games were something that we didn't expect. So every night we get something new. We'll see what happens tonight.
Every night you learn something.
Yes.
You learn a little something, and then it
never
just
too
adds
old
up.
to learn.
Yes, yes. So our big story is Rutgers. It's certainly a huge night for the Scarlet Knights, topping Michigan. It was the first time they've beaten the Wolverines in 15 all-time meetings. You see some of the numbers here. Geo Baker, Ron Harper Jr., just fantastic, combined for 47 points. Baker finishing 2 shy of his career high, as you see. Third loss in 4 games for the Wolverines. They were without a few of their rotation players, and you certainly saw some guys you wouldn't typically see in a game of this magnitude, or at least haven't seen to this point in the year. So there's something to be said for that, but let's not take anything away from Rutgers. They were really good. They were dialed in. This is a game they knew they needed to have. They've got to start piling up some wins at home, a team they've never beaten, and man, they were on point, particularly Baker and Ron Harper Jr., just fantastic, Andy.
Yeah, and this is why they came back. Geo Baker and Ron Harper Jr. came back for moments like this. Obviously, they didn't know they'd beat Purdue in a last-second shot, and Geo Baker didn't play in that game because he was out with the flu. For the two of them to have 47 points, that shows that these two guys are prepared to potentially lead Rutgers back to the NCAA tournament. They've got a mountain to climb because of the early season losses, especially the one to Lafayette. They did not play well early, but Baker was out. I think they will get some credit for that if they can win games.
He played in the Lafayette game, though. He did not play against UMass. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he was hurt for some of their struggles.
Right.
But they brought it to Michigan. And now you check that other box of, okay, now they've beaten a #1 team. They have now knocked off Michigan, so they've beaten everyone in the league since they've entered. And so these are significant milestones for a program that obviously had some catching up to do once they entered the Big Ten. And, I think this serves notice to whoever, we always knew this going into the RAC, but this season now, reset. You go into the RAC, you're in, for a fight. And if Rutgers, and we say this every year it seems with them, if they can find a way to steal one on the road, which they did, 2 years ago, they can still get in. I did not initially have them on my list at the new year, but they definitely, this win now puts them in the conversation to mount a campaign.
Well, here's the thing. Put what happens at the end of the year aside for a minute and just kind of look at this game. It showed you, this has been a terrible shooting team this year. This game showed you how well they can shoot. Now, I think Michigan aided and abetted a little bit, and they had a lot of open shots, but you still got to make those open shots, and they did that. I thought their game plan was pretty interesting against Michigan. I think they were reasonably content to let Hunter Dickinson do his thing inside and just say, Michigan struggles from the perimeter anyway. We're not going to give them any openings out there. And Michigan only hit 3 threes in the entire game. Every one of those shots, I thought, was contested. They put guys in situations, make Caleb Houston beat you. And Caleb Houston couldn't. For whatever reason, he hasn't been as consistent as I think we hoped he would be, a McDonald's All-American, or certainly as consistent as Michigan fans did. But, they're going to guard the heck out of you, Andy. And if they can make shots, man, they're a dangerous team.
Yeah, they sort of accepted that those slips for Dickinson were going to happen. They're going to allow those layups. And to your point, Michigan is not a great shooting team. So if you're going to say, okay, beat us from the three-point line, could Caleb Houston have gone off last night? Yes, he didn't. Devontae Jones, we've talked about that. Their inconsistencies, the whole perimeter, has contributed to sort of a mediocre season so far by Michigan standards. And this Rutgers team, I think gives a lot of hope for the depth of the Big Ten, that we've now stretched it out even more to where we can confidently say 11 teams are going to be in conversations now to trying to get bids. And that helps teams at the top because that means you're going to be playing high-quality games.
Right.
You're going to get points for it, if you will, if everyone can move into that top 75. And so that helps the teams at the top, teams at the middle, and potentially teams at the bottom.
One other guy I want to talk about before we move on from Rutgers, because I do think we have to talk about Michigan. I thought Caleb McConnell had a really good second half, and he was in foul trouble in the first half, and it was somewhat ineffective. It's hard to be effective when you're on the bench for the bulk of it. He came in, defended well, hit a couple big shots. Again, he's one of those players who, if he can contribute regularly, man, all of a sudden you got some issues. You got a lot of different guys you got to deal with. Amori had some big moments inside. I mean, there are plenty of guys you got to guard now all of a sudden.
Yeah, and that was interesting because Amori does not have any help. Last year, he was the help for Miles Johnson.
No backup big.
And, obviously against Illinois, you need a lot of help. You need 10 to 15 fouls against Kofi Cockburn. That is obviously the case against Purdue with Edey and Williams. But, you would think with Dickinson and Diabate that would be a problem, but it wasn't. I think that would be that third team in the Big Ten that can cause you a lot of problems in the post. And they let them do their thing. They locked them on the perimeter, and they won.
Let's focus in on Michigan. I actually thought Diabate played pretty well. Like, if you're going to say what was encouraging for Michigan.
You hit a big shot from the perimeter?
Yeah, absolutely. No, you certainly start to understand why there was a lot of hype around him as well. But, man, these last two games, I mean, UCF hit 8 of 8 threes in the second half, and some of those were closely guarded. But a lot of them were open, and there were a lot of open shots on the perimeter yesterday for Rutgers as well, and it just seems like for whatever reason, they're just not guarding on the perimeter at the level that you would expect them to.
Well, think about it. Two players in UCF, I think, combined for 53 points, if my math is correct. Two against Rutgers, 47 points. So they're allowing guys to go off, multiple guys, and putting themselves in a hole by giving up that kind of points to just two guys. Defensively, it's still a problem for them. I'm still holding out hope because I think there's just too much talent. But they got a monster couple of games coming up with Michigan State and Purdue that they can reset the narrative on their season if they can at least split these two. Because the opportunities are there, and one would think that at some point they're going to win one or two of these games.
And then they go to Illinois after that.
Yes.
I mean, this is a really, you could really dig yourself a hole.
Yeah, look,
I mean,
if they go 0-3,
buried here.
If they go 0-3, they're out the door.
I will say, again, I said it off the top, I think it bears repeating, they were really shorthanded yesterday with rotation players, not with starters, but Brandon Johns and Terrence Williams and some of these guys who at times have been valuable contributors for them were not available for this game. Zeb Jackson wasn't available either. So, again.
Well, no, that does matter.
Yeah, it matters.
Because when they're not shooting the basketball well, okay, let's try you. Let's try you.
Right.
And there was no one down there.
No doubt. Let's go to Illinois and Minnesota. This was a dominant game for Illinois. Kofi Cockburn was just crazy. I mean, Minnesota just has no answer. And let's be fair. There aren't many teams that have answers for Kofi Cockburn. But you think about Illinois, they were coming off a COVID pause. They were saying during the game that virtually the entire team came back and tested positive for COVID. So you were dealing with a lot of guys who had to go through that, who had to go through the quarantine, and you would never have known it by watching them. I mean, man, they were smooth and connected and really good.
Well, first off, I'm glad we're all safe in our crew because we did that Illinois-Missouri game and we're all healthy. But both teams have obviously got ravaged.
What does this mean for me?
I know. So all good. Look, they obviously didn't miss a beat, which is rare coming off a layoff because we've seen this, Ohio State and Nebraska. We've seen this across the country, teams that have not had, or haven't played for a stretch. They picked up exactly where they left off in that Missouri game because they were really good that day. Kofi Cockburn, as you said, no answer for him. Once he gets down the ball in the low post, backs you in, it's over. Jacob Grandison is another player that sometimes we forget to talk about, and he's been really solid for them because obviously Plummer gets a lot of headlines. So I think this Illinois team is heading in the right direction. They legitimately could win the Big Ten again. They're 3-0, feeling really good. It was funny. Last night we were watching the Post, and Brad Underwood, what is it, -5 or something in Minneapolis last night, whatever it was.
Right.
He's in the short sleeves. Maybe thinking like Bud Grant. Remember that? Bud Grant, former Vikings coach, would go out in, no jacket.
Right.
And Brad Underwood, I'm not saying it was -5.
It's not in the. The barn is heated. I know it's an old building,
but still,
they do have heat.
There can be a draft.
I don't know if it's radiators, but
those drafts, those doors open up for some drafts. But anyway, they're playing really well.
To summarize,
yes.
No, they are. They are really playing well. And then it was encouraging. They were saying on the broadcast last night that Andre Curbelo participated quite a bit in the shoot around, and so when they get him back, I mean, man, they're dangerous. They are a really deep team. They've got a lot of different guys.
That's going to be interesting.
Who can beat you.
He's so talented, but now he's got to blend himself back in.
I hear you. Yep.
Because the combination of in the overall perimeter of Plummer, Grandison, Frazier, Williams, it's worked well.
It has.
So now you add that fifth piece in. You got to make sure that it still stays smooth.
He is a really dynamic player. He's also prone to making mistakes.
Yes.
And I think if you look at one...
Ball's got to keep moving.
Yeah, if you look at one issue with Illinois, it is they're still somewhat turnover prone.
Yeah.
When they shoot, I mean, man, they are a great outside shooting team. Plummer is, you want to talk about incredible transfer portal pickups.
Yes.
I mean, incredible. He's fantastic. I've said this a couple times on our air. When he misses, I'm surprised.
Well, and the thing I think... I'm drawing a blank which show we were on, but I think maybe it was yesterday here.
We're on the air a lot.
No, or maybe it was over there. Initially, when Adam Miller left to LSU, and unfortunately he was out for the year, but Illinois fans, pulling their hair out. We lost Adam Miller, and then you bring in Plummer, and the trade looks really good for Illinois right now.
Yeah, and again, this is nothing, not to disparage Adam Miller at all, highly recruited young man, but Plummer's much better than Adam Miller was last year.
But that wasn't the perception.
No doubt. And could Adam Miller be better down the line? Absolutely. And again, but to your point, no doubt. I mean, it's been a plus for them. It's interesting how they have evolved from a poor shooting team to a really good shooting team. And Kofi Cockburn is starting a little bit to figure out that if it's not there inside, he can kick the ball back out. He had a couple more assists yesterday. So we're starting to see some of that from him. But he is overpowering. And then you think about Minnesota, and we have heaped praise on Minnesota this year, and I think deservedly so. They are so far ahead of where anyone outside of that program believed that they could be. This was just their second loss of the year. That being said, you never want to read too much into one result. I always feel like one win is great and one loss, you don't sit here and get all bent out of shape about it because it's just one game. But this did highlight some of the issues, I think, with them. I mean, they are really undersized inside. Eric Curry is going to have to guard some of these bigs in the Big Ten, and I just don't know that he can match up. And he's a wonderful story, and he's an incredible kid, and it's not his fault that that's the spot he's in. But that's just a mismatch with him and Kofi, and it's going to be a mismatch with him and some other of the great bigs down the line in the Big Ten as well.
Yeah, so to that point, I wouldn't panic if you're Minnesota. There are certain games that they're going to be at a disadvantage. One would think it would have been Michigan, but they won that game.
Yes, and they did. Right.
So we can't say that it's a given.
Yep.
Because I would say at the beginning of the season, Minnesota would have had a problem with Michigan, Purdue, Illinois for sure.
Yep.
Those would be the big three, and they already won one of them. So they're allowed to have a game like this. They had a dud. They were due for it because the reality is they had not played this poorly in any game prior. And so maybe there could be a factor. They didn't have the COVID issues, but they also had a long layoff. They have not played since December 22nd. They were supposed to play, Alcorn State, and the game was canceled right before. So they've also had a long gap, and maybe that affected them, but also it just wasn't a good matchup, and they lost.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. I mean, I guess I just feel like this is still a team, again, we've talked about, they're in the tournament right now. I mean, you look at every bracket, and I hate to have that conversation the first week of January.
They just need to win the games that they should win.
Absolutely. No, and again, Ben Johnson done a remarkable job, but I do think we've seen some of the limitations of this team. And they got a little more. I mean, a couple bench players, double-digit minutes yesterday, but that's still going to be an issue. They have zero margin for error in terms of injuries, and unfortunately zero margin for error in terms of illness as well. And we know illness is been a huge issue, no doubt. So we shall see. But again, a great start, no doubt, for Minnesota. Somewhat of a surprising result in women's hoops last night as Nebraska led from start to finish, took down number 8 Michigan at Pinnacle Bank Arena. Freshman Alexis Markowski led the way, career-high 20 points. The Huskers' first victory over a top 10 team since 2014. a signature win for Nebraska. They are now 13-1. And as promised, we welcome in. Oh, there's the celebration. How about that?
That's much better than welcoming me. I'm gonna have a victory shower.
Yeah, victory shower.
This woman's fired up. And I know it's cold in the world. Better than having a tub of mayo poured on you, right?
Yeah. How good the build-up to the tub of mayo, but that's a whole nother conversation. Okay, Meghan McKeown is here, Big Ten Network basketball analyst. Let's get into this. So Nebraska to me is really interesting because here was a team that was 12-1, and yet they weren't ranked. And I think there was this sense, Meghan, that they were kind of a product of their schedule. They really hadn't beaten anyone of significance. They have beaten someone of significance now. I mean, that is a really enormous win. Give me a sense of what you feel like you learned about Nebraska last night.
Well, we learned that Nebraska deserves to be a top 25 team, and they went 12-0 in the non-conference leading up to Big Ten play, which I don't care who you're playing. That's really difficult to do night in and night out. They actually have an 8 net ranking right now. That's the highest of all the Big Ten teams, and they proved last night that they can hang with the top teams in the Big Ten. Multiple players that are now so common. I think the addition of Jazz Shelley to their roster, the point guard transferred from Oregon, and she plays with so much patience and allows everybody else on Nebraska's roster to play to their role. Sam Hybe playing with so much more confidence this year off of the ball, and that's just kind of allowed everything else to open up offensively, and ultimately they did a great job sticking to their game plan last night. Anytime you play against Michigan, you got to stop forward Naz Hillman. She's the reigning Big Ten Player of the Year.
Yeah.
Good luck guarding her without fouling. But Nebraska slowed her down and really frustrated her early, and ultimately was able to get Michigan to stay at bay the rest of the game.
I thought it was really impressive on the offensive end. They hit 8 threes, and yet they had 40 points in the paint, right? And so it's tough to defend a team like that, where there are a lot of different ways that they can beat you. And I think that's what we're starting to see with this Nebraska team. And man, Markowski made a huge difference.
Massive.
Incredible.
The freshman really coming in.
Yeah.
20
From
points,
Lincoln.
7 rebounds.
Yeah.
You love that story, and her father with the storied tenure at Nebraska as
Right.
well. And every single year, it seems, Amy Williams is able to find these bigs to come into Nebraska and take over in the paint. And that just opens so much up for Nebraska offensively. The Huskers, also one of the most disciplined teams, and they can slow down pace of play. In the Big Ten, there are so many teams that like to get out, run, and score. You have 3 teams that rank in the top 10 of the country in points per game with more than 80. So Nebraska is one of those teams that can slow down that pace of play, and it works to their advantage.
What do you make of Michigan here? I mean, this is a team that has had some really good wins, right? I mean, they had beaten Baylor and Ohio State here recently. You talk about Naz Hillman was really held in check in this game. Was this just kind of a bump in the road of coming up against a motivated team saying, hey, we're going to prove to the world that we deserve to be ranked and that we deserve to be mentioned in the same breath as teams like Michigan and Maryland? Is that what this was about, or is there something deeper here that's a problem with Michigan?
This was just a bump in the road for Michigan. This is one of the best teams, not only in the conference, but in the country because of the way that they play with that inside-outside game. Naz Hillman is able to just be a presence in the paint. She's so difficult to defend without fouling. And then you have a player like Leah Brown who can knock it down from 3 at a relatively high clip. Not to mention, Michigan's been playing without their starting point guard. She actually just made an appearance last night. Amy Dilk was injured earlier in the season. So they haven't had a complete team just yet. But this is a Michigan team that can score inside and outside. They've already knocked off a top 10 team in Baylor this season. They blew out Ohio State, who's going to be an NCAA tournament team, by more than 20 points. So overall, this Michigan team is just fine. It's a bump in the road. This is still a top contender for the Big Ten title.
So that was the game that kind of, I don't want to say sent shockwaves, but maybe raised some eyebrows in the Big Ten yesterday. Over the weekend, the huge result was Indiana beating Maryland. It's the first time Indiana has ever beaten Maryland, and this is something they've really set their sights on, kind of, hey, we know we've arrived when we knock off the Terps. They were an Elite Eight team last year. They brought back their entire starting 5. What did this tell us about Indiana? And you talk about dictating pace. They dictated pace in this one.
What it told us was Indiana's not just good, they're real good. The Hoosiers coming in, taking on a top-ranked Maryland team. And Maryland, again, one of those teams that likes to get out and run with pace. Indiana, another team that is so disciplined. All 5 starters returned from last year's Elite Eight team. And all 5 starters average double figures. So everyone knows their role on the team, and they know how to score. Massive win from the standpoint of it proved that Indiana is not just a Big Ten powerhouse, but should be in the national conversation as well. They're going to continue making strides this season. I'm looking forward to seeing just how high that ceiling is for them.
So they're the highest ranked team in the Big Ten right now. Are they the best team in the Big Ten in your estimation?
Right now, they are the best team in the Big Ten because they are the most experienced team in the Big Ten at the moment. And they've had the most time this season to play together. Maryland had all 5 starters return, but they had a lot of injuries that they've had to deal with. Same with Michigan. They've had to deal with injuries as well. Some of those other top teams, Iowa, dealing with players in and out. So at the moment, Indiana is the best team in this league because they're the most disciplined and they have the most experience together so far this season.
What do you make of Maryland at this point? They have 4 losses now. They're all the really good teams. I mean, their schedule.
Let's be clear here, right?
Their schedule was crazy. How challenging.
Nobody wants to play Maryland right now. Nobody wants to play against the Terps. They are still a perennial power, not just in the Big Ten, but also in women's basketball. And they've dealt with a ton of injuries as well.
Right.
Katie Benson, their star shooting guard, was out for a little bit. Diamond Miller, their star forward, just kind of consistently got back to playing in that Coppin State game right before Christmas break. This Maryland team has so much star power, especially when you have a point guard like Ashley Owusu, who has the ability to get into the paint and create the way she can. Maryland is athletic, they're long, they can shoot threes, they can get to the basket, and Angel Reese has emerged as a force to be reckoned with. She's a sophomore averaging a double-double, and she's so difficult to defend. Maryland's going to peak. It's early right now. I know we live in a time of hot takes. I'm coming in with a slow simmer here. Maryland will be peaking very soon. For all you Terps fans out there, everyone take a deep breath.
You're not going to pound the table and tell us Maryland's done. They've got major issues.
No,
okay.
I'm not a betting woman, but I wouldn't bet on that.
I respect your restraint that you show. Yeah, anyone who watches Maryland knows how good they are. Anyone who watches Caitlin Clark knows how good she is, too. She had 44 points against Evansville this weekend. It's the most any woman has ever scored inside Carver Hawkeye Arena. Here's what is amazing to me with Caitlin Clark. She has now gone over 1,000 points in her career. She is 10 games into her sophomore season, and she has scored 1,000 points. Like, that is so mind-boggling to me. I really can barely wrap my mind around it. It's absurd, frankly. Put her scoring prowess and just her prowess in general into perspective.
Caitlin Clark became the fastest person in the Big Ten history to score 1,000 points in a game. She did it in 40 games, which is unbelievable. But it's the way that she plays that makes her so special. Caitlin Clark is one of the most exciting players, not just in the Big Ten, but in women's college basketball as a whole. She is so exciting in the way that she scores. She's a 3-level scorer, so she can get to the basket, and she finishes with such ease and craft underneath. She can also hit from that mid-range, and then my favorite type of 3 is a logo 3, because you got to make it interesting. And Clark takes 1 or 2 dribbles over half court, and she'll launch it from there. It goes in. She has the green light to shoot it. So she scores in such an exciting way that makes people want to watch the game, which is great for women's basketball. She also facilitates, She comes down. Her vision in the open court is incredible. She's throwing no-look passes. Just brings that excitement level up so much for this team. And then she's actually averaging 24 points, 8 rebounds, nearly 7 assists. We're flirting with the triple-double here. Do not be surprised if at some point in her career, Clark's averaging a triple-double. She is just fabulous. She's fun to watch, and we get to watch her tomorrow night on the Big Ten Network. You do. Against a very well-coached Northwestern team. It's going to be a great game. I like the ad in there. Yes. Again, taking on Joe McKeown and the Northwestern Wildcats tonight with Meghan and Mike Hall on the call. Nightcap of a doubleheader that starts at 6 Eastern with number 10 Maryland, who we're talking about taking on Penn State against women's basketball presented by Disney Parks on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app tomorrow. Meghan, great stuff. Thanks a lot. Going to turn our attention to wrestling next. The number 1 team in the nation getting some rough news over the weekend. We'll get some context, take a look at what's happening throughout the conference, the best wrestling conference in America, year in and year out. Shane Sparks joins us next. Some huge wrestling news last week. Iowa's Spencer Lee, a 3-time NCAA champion, announced he is out for the year. He's going to have ACL surgery on both knees. Plans to return to Iowa next season and shoot for his 4th individual national championship. Lee's just been remarkable. You see some of the individual notes on him. He's the 7th 3-time national champ at Iowa, which is pretty remarkable. He won the Big Ten Medal of Honor. He's twice won the Hodge Trophy as the nation's top wrestler. He's won 38 matches in a row. Again, just a fabulous wrestler. As we go to our big interview and we bring in Shane Sparks, Big Ten Network wrestling analyst. Shane, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us. So put this in perspective. I think that a lot of people, even if you barely follow wrestling, they know who Spencer Lee
is he had the excuses are for wusses line when he informed everyone after winning a championship that he was wrestling without 2 ACLs. I mean, he's an incredible guy. He's got a great personality. Give us a sense of what this means kind of seismically in college wrestling.
It's going to be really hard to put it into words, Dave. This is a huge loss for Iowa. You saw the accolades before. This is one of the best college wrestlers, one of the best college athletes in all the country. To put his dominance in some kind of perspective, he's got a 38-match winning streak. In those 38 matches, he's outscored his opponents 463 to 43. Video game stats, and he's the 125-pounder, the catalyst, the guy that really gets this team going. In a dual meet setting, he's phenomenal, and in a tournament setting as well, different scoring. This guy makes such a big impact. It's going to be hard to overcome that kind of loss. Quite frankly, it's impossible, but Iowa, they got some other talents they could step in for Spencer Lee. But it's a big loss for the Hawkeyes.
Yeah, and that's where it gets really interesting when you start talking about the national championship picture, and you hate to be talking about it this early, but this is what people talk about. And you know, the Big Ten, again, has 3 legitimate national championship contenders. They've got 11 teams in the top 25. I mean, the league is fabulous year in and year out, and this is no exception. But league gets you points, right? I mean, the way you win the national championship is you accumulate points in these tournaments. So what does it mean for Iowa's championship hopes, and how can they kind of make up for the fact that you're losing this big chunk of points you were counting on?
Well, there's still plenty of talent. The cupboard is not bare when you look at this lineup. Up and down, so much experience. Still 9 potential All-Americans could be in this Hawkeye lineup. They have 2 other national finalists from a year ago, Jaden Ironman at 141 and Michael Kemmer at 174, although we have not seen Kemmer yet. Here's an interesting fact with Iowa. They have had a national finalist every year since 1990. That's 32 consecutive straight tournaments. And in 1990, that year, they had 3 finalists, 2 national champions, ironically, Tom and Terry Brands. But this team, so much experience. Wrestling is an individual sport. And at Iowa, they will continue to preach, you take care of your own business, and the team things take care of itself. As far as replacing Spencer Lee at 125, they have Drake Ayala, who is a true freshman. He's a 3-time state champion from Fort Dodge, Iowa. This last Sunday at the Southern Scuffle down in Chattanooga, Tennessee, he was in the 3rd-place match. He was wrestling Noah Certain from Missouri, who then was ranked 12th. He went to his back early in the first period. He was down 7-0 going into the 3rd period. Ayala scores 4 takedowns, gets 2 turns, 6 near fall points, and wins it 14-10. He is really, really talented, and it'll be interesting to see if they pull his red shirt and insert him in the lineup. We could see him as early as Friday against Minnesota on the Big Ten Network.
I was interested in that. I was reading a little bit about him, and I was confused by the notion that he wrestled this weekend and yet still is eligible for a red shirt. Explain that to me, Shane.
Yeah, so in college wrestling, you get a redshirt season where you wrestle unattached. So you still, can get plenty of wrestling in it at primarily open tournaments. I believe college football is, 4 games, I believe?
Yes.
You're able to do that. In college wrestling, once you wrestle once, then it's officially going to be a year of eligibility. So I think the original plan was to redshirt Drake Ayala because he had Spencer Lee at 125, Austin DeSanto at 133. But now what they could possibly do is if they use Drake Ayala, they could redshirt him next year when Spencer Lee plans on coming back at 125, or perhaps Ayala goes 133. They have some different options right there.
Interesting. I mentioned Iowa as a national championship contender. There are probably 2 other teams in the Big Ten that would fall in that category. Penn State, who, of course, had a great run of national championships, in Michigan as well. Let's give fans a little bit of a sense of each one of those teams, starting with Michigan.
I'm just so excited about Big Ten college wrestling right now because you said it, Dave. There are 3 teams that I don't think anybody would doubt as a chance to win that team title in Detroit in March. Michigan has so much experience. That's the thing that stands out for me with the Wolverines. They are led by a pair of Olympians. Stevan Micic was an Olympian for Serbia. He's now at 141. He's a 2-time Big Ten champion, won both those titles down at 133. In 2019, he was a 133-pound national finalist. We haven't seen him since then, so he's back in the mix at 141. That's a stacked weight class. It'll be interesting to see how he does at the new weight class. And Miles Amin at 184, I call him Mr. Wolverine. This guy embodies the maize and blue. multiple-time All-American, Big Ten champion last March at 197. They've lowered him back down to 184. He'll be in the mix to win a national title. Those two guys lead the way. They got some big-time transfers. Nick Suriano won a national title for Rutgers, the first to ever do it for the Scarlet Knights back in 2019. He's going to wrestle 125 for the Wolverines. That's probably the biggest off-season acquisition to speak of for the Wolverines. They also have a heavyweight that's a junior world champion in Mason Paris. He's an NCAA runner-up. Logan Massa's back, All-American at 174. They have Cam Amin, an All-American at 165. So as you can see, Michigan has a lot of talent, great experience, and a very balanced lineup. Lots to be excited about if you're a Wolverine wrestling fan.
What about Penn State? I mean, they've won 8 of the last 10 national championships, have, as I said, had just a remarkable run. They have 4 NCAA individual national champions returning. Give us a sense of the depth of this Penn State team as they shoot for another national title.
I've always said, Dave, that wrestling is my favorite sport. Baseball is my favorite game. So I make a lot of baseball wrestling comparisons when I'm doing broadcasts. Penn State's got a bunch of guys that can hit 50 home runs. They got those 4 returning national champions right on your screen. There is Aaron Brooks. He's a 2-time Big Ten champion. So good on his feet. He's the reigning national champion. Lower weights, Roman Bravo Young at 133. This guy is maybe the most dynamic wrestler in college wrestling. He is box office. You watch him once, you'll never forget him. Nick Lee at 141 might be the grittiest, toughest wrestler in all of college wrestling. And they have another national champion in Carter Starachi at 174. It was fun to watch him last year. He's just really, really tough. And he's a guy that just found ways to win. Looking at other guys on Penn State's team, going back to some of these transfers, they just recently got one from Central Michigan, Drew Hildebrandt. He was an All-American last year, finished 4th at 125. He fits in perfect at 125 for the Nittany Lions. And then they got Max Dean. Max Dean was a national finalist for Cornell in 2019. He slides in at 197. They got an All-American in Greg Kirklead at heavyweight. So they have big-time horsepower. And Penn State, they've won 8 of the last 10 national tournaments. They just figure it out. It's one thing to look at a Penn State lineup this time of year. It's a completely different story to watch Penn State in March. Couple question marks for the Nittany Lions. 157 and 165. Those are 2 weight classes trying to figure out. They got a couple of options. But when I look at Penn State, those will be 2 weight classes. I'll be interested to see, how they develop those weight classes and what kind of production they get from those 2 weight classes in March.
Shane, I want to leave you with this quickly. The Big Ten's won 15 straight team national championships. Do you believe that they will extend? That's actually won 14 straight, looking for number 15.
Yep.
Do you believe they'll extend it this year?
I do. When you look at those 3 teams we just spoke about, those are the 3 favorites. The last team outside of the Big Ten to win the team title was Oklahoma State back in 2006, led by the great John Smith. Oklahoma State's a really good team. We saw them on the Big Ten Network back in mid-November wrestling Minnesota. The Cowboys are solid, but it's a big year for the Big Ten. To get to 15 straight, the previous record by the Big Ten was 9 straight. That was from 1978 to 1986. That 9 all won by the Hawkeyes. Interestingly enough, that streak was snapped by Iowa State, and our wrestling analyst, Jim Gibbons, was the head coach of that team. So, I like where the Big Ten is here in 2022. I fully expect the Big Ten to make it 15 straight. It is the nation's premier wrestling conference. Every year, Dave, I think it can't get any better. It just can't get any better. And every year, it just keeps on getting better. It is a phenomenal conference on the mat.
It all comes full circle back to the Big Ten Network, too, because the Big Ten has never not won the NCAA wrestling championship in the Big Ten Network era. So we'll just take all the responsibility for it. Shane Sparks, great stuff. Always appreciate your energy, your enthusiasm, and most of all, your knowledge. It's just second to none. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dave. Always appreciate being on the show.
Absolutely.